All right. My name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to, let's see, where are we? Week number 6 in this cycle of the God idea. The original intention was Kathy was going to lead us through this, but her schedule got changed, so she'll be with us in a couple of weeks. So I'll start it, and she'll take us through the rest of it. But we have begun our journey in the big book, and we've started after the forewords and so on with the doctor's opinion. And just by way of background, uh, who is this guy? Well, Dr. William D. Silkworth was a neurologist who had a very healthy practice going in Manhattan. And besides his private practice, he was also um, uh, a physician at Bellevue, working with the alcoholics in their ward. And when the 1929 stock market crash happened, he lost everything. Every penny he had was lost in the crash. And his friend Charlie Towns asked him to come to work for him and be his clinical director of the Charles Towns Alcohol and Drug Addiction Hospital. And he agreed to do that. And in 1930, he started to work for Charlie Towns. And by the time he was asked to write this chapter for the book, this section of the book, he calculated he's worked with about 40,000 alcoholics between the the Towns Hospital and the Knickerbocker Hospital. The Knickerbocker Hospital was further up in the 130s in Manhattan, was not as fancy a rest home as the Towns Hospital was. It was more for everyday people. But he was an administrator there. He set up the program. And what he noticed was he was working with all of these alcoholics, and he started to notice a few things. He started to see that there's this group of drinkers who come in horrible, terrible, terrible shape, physically, mentally, just beat to death. And he got them healthy, um, worked out, got vitamins, got them in the right kind of physical condition. And after a few weeks or months, depending on how much their bank account could handle, they cut them loose. And in a short amount of time, most of them came back. And they came back worse than they were in the first place, the first time. And then there is this third group of alcoholics, a third group of drinkers who never wind up in the hospital because of their drinking. So he said there must be something different about this first group, that we nurse them back to health, cut them loose, and they keep coming back and back and back and back. I left out the second group, incidentally. Second group were the people who came in the same kind of condition we were in, but they're nursed back to health and they're sent on their way and they never come back. So this first group, there's something different about them. And he started to realize that there's something physiological that happens to this group of people when they drink, when they ingest alcohol, that doesn't happen to the other groups of drinkers. And I won't say alcoholics because they're not all alcoholics, to other people who digest, who drink alcohol. And he started to realize that they have this this abnormal reaction. Most people have a couple of drinks and you ask them for some more if they want some more, and at some point they're going to say no. Either they're going to get sick, or they got to drive, or any number of things they're going to say that boil down to no. But there's this other group that just doesn't seem to be able to do that, that once they start drinking, they get more and more thirsty. And he said, but that isn't the real problem. The real problem with this group of drinkers is that they also have a mental obsession that tells them, their mind begins to play tricks on them. Um, Once they stop drinking, once they get nursed back to health, their mind begins to play tricks on them. And it begins to think about how one or two drinks would make them feel. And they start to think about how good it makes them feel and not how bad what it does to their life. And he said that idea, that thought becomes so powerful that it eventually pushes aside all thoughts to the contrary, all of the experiences that these people have about what happens every time they drink. And this obsession takes over, and the obsession is they don't have an allergy. That's what the obsession tells them. You don't have an allergy. So you can safely take that first drink or that second, but at some point you're going to stop. You'll have a game plan. And these alcoholics, these drinkers can't seem to stick to that. And we don't know for sure. Bill Wilson is absolutely not the first person that Dr. Silkworth told us to. But we do know that Bill Wilson was the first person he gave it to who eventually also had the solution in his mind. Because Bill, when he was first hospitalized at Towns Hospital, was told this theory by Dr. Silkworth. But then between his third and his fourth stay, he ran into Ebby Thatcher, who gave him the solution that he had found through the Oxford groups, practicing certain spiritual activities to achieve absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. And so when Bill and Dr. Bob decided that they were going to write this book, they asked Dr. Silkworth if he would consider writing something for the beginning of it. Now, for many years, I just said that that's what I always assumed had happened. But I've done a little bit more investigating, and I got a little bit more information in case you're interested. Rob, you want to give me, I think it's number 8, Esther Richards' letter. If anyone wants copies of any of these things that we're putting up, Rob, I'm sure we'll put them in the chat, or you can drop me an email at thebigbookstudy@aol.com, and I'll send it to you. But this young lady, Esther Richards, worked for Johns Hopkins Hospital, and she was the director of the Phillips Clinic. Was kind of an alcohol and drug clinic, as much as you could have one in those days. It was an outpatient facility. And she was one of the people that Bill sent the mimeographed copies of the book when it was sent out to about 3,000 people in the beginning, to various clergymen and doctors and so on, people not non-alcoholics. He wanted to know what they thought of this book. And this was her comment to Bill about the book. She said, these 2 chapters, because that's all he was sending out in the beginning, were the first few chapters, are the embodiment of what makes any book great. They have something to say, and they have to say it is presented in clear, concise, graphic words. It carries the reader on and on with pictures that tell the story of their real life facts. There's no attempt at highbrow theories veneered with scientific and psychological wordiness. And then jumping down to the end of this first paragraph is the more important quote, where she says, I think you should get a #1 physician who has a wide knowledge of the alcoholic's medical and social problems to write the introduction. And that #1 physician that Bill asked to write was, of course, Dr. Silkworth. And you can take that down, Rob. And Dr. Silkworth agreed to write this under 2 conditions. One, that you call it an opinion. He said, I don't have any medical data. I haven't done any studies. I just have my experience working with, at that point, about 40,000 alcoholics. And I formulated some opinions on those things. And that's what I'd like to call it, is an opinion. And the second thing is, you don't use my name. Do not put my name on this thing. Because 2 years prior to the publication of this book in 1937, Dr. Silkworth wrote an article for the Lancet Journal, one of the most world-renowned medical journals, a British journal, in which he laid out his theories about the allergy and the obsession, and he took a beating. His contemporaries accused him of being conned, of being taken in by these crafty alcoholics, that it's all in the mind. And he didn't want to go through that again. So he said, don't use my name on this thing. And what happened is by 1955, when the second edition came out, the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association both changed their opinion and said that alcoholism was indeed a medical condition. And the unfortunate part about it is that Dr. Silkworth passed away in 1951. He never got that vindication. He never got to hear that. And so Bill, through Silkworth's family, got the okay to put his name and use it, which is why most versions that you see today are signed William D. Silkworth. And the doctor's letter begins with an introduction by Bill, where he tells us that this guy knows what he's talking about. Pay attention to what Dr. Silkworth has to say. And then there's Dr. Silkworth's letter. And this is often referred to as the first letter, but it's the only letter. There's only one letter in this book. Letters begin with "to whom it may concern," and they end with things like "very truly yours." This second part of this statement doesn't do that. So he wrote this letter, and then Bill wrote what I call connective tissue between the letter and the statement. And this connective tissue begins, if you're looking at your book in the fourth edition, page XXVI, which is where this statement that Bill wrote. The physician who, at our request, gave this letter has been kind enough to enlarge his views in another statement, which follows. Not another letter, another statement. And in case we missed it the first time, the very next sentence says, in this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Another revolutionary concept, because it was all thought to be in the mind up until this point. And then in the next paragraph, he makes a statement that was also revolutionary when he says, we have an allergy to alcohol. Now, I don't know about you, but I found that concept difficult to swallow because I'm allergic to a lot of things, and I never had those kind of reactions to alcohol. How can I be allergic to stuff I consume in such enormous, prodigious quantities? Well, I had to look up in the dictionary the definition of allergy, and I realized an allergy is defined as an abnormal reaction. That's not normal, that's not regular, that's not your average, that's not your typical reaction. That we have an abnormal reaction. The normal reaction is to at some point say no, and our lack of ability to do that means that we have a different condition. We have a different metabolic handling of this, and they call it in this book the phenomenon of craving. Now, if it were written some years later, we wouldn't use the words phenomenon, because phenomenon means an observable but unexplainable fact. Because Dr. Silkworth couldn't give the information that we now know about how metabolically our bodies digest and break down the enzymes and the proteins and all of that stuff, which makes my hair hurt when I even think about how complicated it is. But the point is, it's not a phenomenon anymore. We now know exactly how it happens. So be that as it may, what we talked about last week is we got up to the point where Bill had finished giving his introduction to this statement. And then we go into the statement, which is on page XXVII, that begins with "the doctor writes." Now, this section that I'm about to start reading was based on that article that Dr. Silkworth wrote in the Lancet Journal. Rob, let's take a look at number 46 for a moment. Here we go. Nope, not that one. That's 40. It's reclamation of the alcoholic. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. You're right. I'm wrong. I apologize. This is the letter. This is not the letter, the article that he wrote for the Lancet Journal. And you could see it's dated April 1937. And Bill thought this was a little too complicated for everyday people. So he asked Dr. Silkworth to kind of dumb this down. And Dr. Silkworth wrote this second piece, is number 45, Rob, if you don't mind. Which incorrectly identifies it as the original second letter. This is the version of what we're about to read that Dr. Silkworth gave to Bill, and Bill had to rewrite, because what we're about to read is more Bill Wilson than it is Dr. Silkworth. But Dr. Silkworth did write the gist of it, and Bill just kind of made it so that we could digest it, so that we could understand it. And in this statement, there's only one paragraph that is grabbed entirely from the original that you're looking at now to what appears in the big book. And I'll mention it to you when we get there, and you'll see why he rewrote so much of this stuff. But this is the thing that Dr. Silkworth gave Bill as the thing that he would like to have put in the book. They agreed to rewrite it, and now it appears a little differently, and that's where we are today on page XXVII. We could take that down. There we go. The doctor writes, the subject presented in this book, and you may want to add an S to subject, because there are two subjects addressed in this book. I've highlighted the subject addressed in this book, and above it I've written alcoholism and spiritual experience, because that's what's covered in this book. This is a book that teaches us how to change from active alcoholism and having a spiritual experience to not having to be like that anymore. So the subjects presented in this book seem to me to be of paramount importance. Paramount just means first, foremost, more important than anything else, to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I hate to break that to you, but the word addiction and drug addiction does appear in a number of places in this book. I say this after many years' experience as medical doctor of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in those pages. That last sentence, I don't think was in the original. That's Bill Wilson patting himself on the back. But now this next paragraph, I'm going to read to you exactly the way it is in the book, because that's the way it was when Dr. Silkworth gave it to Bill. And then I'm going to go back through it and we're going to make some changes. And you see what you think, if Bill was right to do this or not. So I'm reading it the way it reads in the book. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. WTF, WTF, WTF. I don't know about you, but I didn't understand it when I first read it, and I still don't, the way it's written here. So let's go through it again, and we're going to make some changes. I'm going to first ask that you underline a couple of words. We doctors have realized that some form of, please underline moral psychology. And above it, write spiritual experience. So we've underlined moral psychology and we're substituting spiritual experience in its place. And then on the next line, it says, but its application, please underline its application. And above it, write the spiritual experience. Hang with me, just have a little faith. When we get to the end of the paragraph, it'll make sense. The spiritual experience presented difficulties beyond our, please underline the word conception, and above it, the words medical capacities, capacities, medical capacities. What with our ultra-modern, let's underline ultra-modern, and above it write most up-to-date. Ultra-modern is replaced with most up-to-date. Our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of, underline the word good, please, and above it write the word God. So we've replaced good with God. That lie outside our, please underline synthetic knowledge, and above it write medications or experience, giving you a choice. Either one of those words will fit. So now I'm going to read it with the changes and tell me if it doesn't make more sense. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of spiritual experience was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but the spiritual experience presented difficulties beyond our medical capacities. What with our most up-to-date standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of God that lie outside our experience or that lie outside our medications. And basically, he's saying that in med school, there was never a class that was called God 101. They had anatomy and physiology. They had all kinds of pharmaceutical classes and medical classes and all of that. There was not one single class on God. So he's saying that we knew that some form of spiritual experience was viable, was successful in these cases, but we didn't know how to do it. We don't know how to talk to people about finding God. What we know is our experience, and what we know is our medications. The words moral psychology, incidentally, are going to appear again later on in this chapter. And basically, one of the things that Bill forgot to do when he rewrote it is he left out the part where Dr. Silkworth explained what what the term moral psychology means. And I'll give you a brief translation of it. It's in Writing the Big Book, page 139, but it says this: the primary function of moral psychology is to address the underlying egotism found in alcoholics whose interests center entirely in themselves. And when successfully applied, it liberates them to the point where they begin to ask how they can be of help to others. The purpose of moral psychology then is to assist alcoholics in overcoming their perspective of extreme self-centeredness and encouraging them to adopt an attitude of consideration and care for others. In other words, we'll love you until you learn to give a shit about someone else. Moral psychology means the same thing as spiritual experience. Same thing. To take the king baby syndrome, which is what alcoholics are accused of falling prey to, and changing them so that they actually begin to give a damn about other people. So when we see the term moral psychology in this chapter, that's what he's talking about. Just change that to spiritual experience because it means the same thing. Okay. Just out of curiosity, we're how many people found the changed version to be helpful? Right? Wasn't it easier to understand once we made the changes? Yeah, I thought so. Okay. All right. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, Bill Wilson, came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas, please underline some ideas, which he put into, please underline, practical application at once. Above some ideas, I'm going to suggest you write A/O, allergy and obsession. We're going to be putting that in a number of places, and rather than writing it out all the time, alcohol, allergy, obsession, it's easier to just write A/O. When you start to use it often enough, and we will, it's very easy to keep track of what it means. So he said he acquired some ideas. He learned about the allergy and the obsession from Dr. Silkworth, and he wanted to put it into practical application, means he wanted to put it into action. That's what practical application means, is action. And when did he want to put it into action? Not after 90 days, not after a year, not after 6 months, at once, immediately. Whatever Bill had experienced in his spiritual experience, he knew that in order to pass it along, he needed to do that immediately and not waste any time. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgivings, that just means doubts, we consented. Think about that for a minute. Bill Wilson had been a patient in this hospital 4 times in 2 years, which actually isn't that much. We're going to read later about his partner, Hank Parkhurst, who took 10 hospitalizations before he got it right. So Bill had 4, but here's a guy who had 4 hospitalizations. Something happened to him in his last hospitalization where he felt the hand of God and so on, and we'll talk about what that is later. And he went to the directors and wanted to now tell the rest of the patients what his experience was and to help them to have that experience. And believe it or not, they agreed. That's amazing. That shows you actually how desperate they were, because they didn't know what to do. They hadn't found a successful method for treating alcoholics. In hundreds of years, they hadn't done that. This guy thinks he has it. And they had the faith and the belief in him to let him be exposed to their patients. That's an astounding thing. When I think of the delicate, what Bill called the chain of cosmic coincidences that led to the birth of Alcoholics Anonymous yesterday, our 90th birthday, incidentally, that's one of the things that just makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They let him do that. That's a crazy notion. You know, in most cases, I'd have thought they'd call him over a nurse and tell him to snow this guy, give him 10 milligrams of Valium and put him to sleep. He wants to come in and be the doctor. They let him do it. Amazing, amazing. Okay. Later, to other patients here, with some misgivings, we consented. The cases we have followed along, though, have been most interesting. In fact, please underline, many of them are amazing. Now I'm going to suggest you highlight the rest of the paragraph. And I want to go back to the previous page. The last paragraph on the previous page says, though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane. Now, last week we talked about that, and we defined spiritual as this journey, this spiritual journey we're on to make a connection with and establish a relationship with and a dependence on our Creator, to have this spiritual enlightenment. And the altruistic plane is the selflessness of these men, that it's not about selfishness, it's the opposite. It's selflessness. And I mentioned that Bill's going to give us a few examples of what it is to be altruistic on the next page. And that's what we're about to read. So, paragraph, the section I'm referring to here begins with the unselfishness of these men. Please underline unselfishness of these men and put the number 1 above it. That's the first example of altruism. Unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them. Here's number 2, the entire absence of profit motive. That's altruistic. They're not in it to make money. And number 3, please underline their community spirit. Their community spirit. Unselfishness. Moral psychology has brought that about. Their community spirit is indeed aspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power. Notice power is capitalized. Whenever power is in uppercase in this book, it means God. When it's in lowercase, it means strength, but human strength. So he ain't talking about human will here. He's talking about something beyond that. That still more in the power, which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his, please underline these 2 words, physical craving for liquor. And the reason why I'm asking you to do that is because I want to get into the habit of connecting the word craving with a physiological reaction. You go to a meeting today and somebody says, man, I've been craving a drink all day. I know what he means. You know what he means. The problem is, in the context of the big book, he doesn't know what he means, because you cannot crave it until it's in you. Craving is a physiological reaction to the ingestion of alcohol. Before it's ingested, it's all up here. It's all in our minds. It's all in our thinking. It's all in that, what leads to the obsession. And Bill's going to go through in the next page 3 extraordinarily easy examples that back that up. So we're not relying just on these 2 words here. Watch what he has to say. Whenever people ask me, how am I so sure? How am I so confident that craving refers to the physical reaction of the ingestion of alcohol? I read them some segments of this paragraph. We believe, let me finish this sentence. An alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. And this often means a definite hospital procedure, detox. Get him cleaned up, get that out of his system, a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, please underline so suggested a few years ago, and above it, you may want to write Lancet Journal, Lancet Journal, April 1937. And like I said, we looked at it before. Rob put it in the chat. I bet you all you have to do is Google Lancet Journal, April 1937, and you'll find it real easy. But that's what he's referring to, that this article that he wrote 2 years ago, he suggested this stuff and he got lambasted for it. But let's see what he says. And I'm going to suggest you highlight everything from the word, the action of alcohol, to the end of the paragraph. There's so much important information in this one paragraph. So let's just highlight it all and not keep stopping and starting. So we believe, and so suggested a few years ago in that article in the Lancet Journal, he said that the action of alcohol, let's underline action of alcohol, on these chronic, let's underline chronic, we're not talking about acute, although I like to think I was a pretty cute chronic alcoholic, but we're not talking about cute or acute. We're talking about chronic. And we're not talking about the kind of chronic you smoke either. You know, it's gotten to be that every word's got double meanings for it now. We talk about chronic. Now we're talking about weed. I didn't have to talk about that some years ago. Now it's a part of our culture. Okay. On these chronic alcoholics is, please underline, a manifestation of an allergy. There's one indication. That the phenomenon of craving, please underline phenomenon of craving, is limited to this class and never, circle never, please, occurs in the average temperate drinker. And above average temperate, just put the word normal. Because remember, we defined allergy as a body's abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. When we read it last week, we made note of that on the previous page. So we're just going back to that the average temperate drinker is the normal drinker, the everyday drinker. These allergic types can never, and you may want to circle never, safely use, please underline, alcohol in any form at all. Alcohol in any form at all. Now, I take a very liberal, broad interpretation of those words, alcohol in any form, because to me, it means anything I drink, swallow, smoke, snort, shoot, shove, whatever chemical I put in my body that alters my perception of reality is in this case alcohol in any form at all. There were times when Bill would speak and he'd refer to alcohol as, quote, the narcotic alcohol. So the words go together. But alcohol in any form, like I said, I take that to mean any of those things, anything I put in my system that changes my reaction to reality, whether I'm drinking it, smoking it, etc. If you want, you could take a strict interpretation of it, and alcohol in any form, meaning if it contains alcohol, you shouldn't have anything to do with it. For example, NyQuil, cold medicine, NyQuil, has a lot of alcohol in it. When I couldn't get anything else, I used a hell of a lot of NyQuil in my time. Vanilla extract has alcohol, probably should stay away from it. A lot of maraschino cherries has alcohol, probably should stay away from it. I didn't realize it till a few years ago, but hair conditioner, most hair conditioners have alcohol in it. Did you know that? I didn't. I knew that shampoos don't have alcohol. I don't know why it is, but most conditioners do have alcohol. So if the thought of just using the alcohol disturbs you, and I know a number of people who are like that, don't use it. You can easily find conditioner that doesn't have alcohol. I know you could find it because I got a cupboard full of it here in the house. So you can find these things if you look for them. Mouthwash doesn't have to contain alcohol, but it does. So strict interpretation, stay away from anything that is connected with alcohol. Play it safe, because the mind can start to play tricks on us. I know that if we eat food that's been cooked in alcohol, I know that the alcohol is burned off, that the effect, the intoxicating effect, is burned away. I know that. But I do know some people who start to play games with the idea of, I just got over here. I just found a way to put some alcohol in my system without anybody knowing it. And it starts to play games. My suggestion is, why tempt fate? Just don't use it. Simple. Okay, so let's continue. So he's beginning his paragraph by talking about the allergy. And now he's about to shift into spiritual malady. These allergic types can never use alcohol in any form at all. And now we go into the spiritual malady. once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it, once having, underline please, lost their confidence, please underline their reliance upon things human, and above that or next to it, I've written beyond human aid, because that's what that means. We've lost our self-confidence and we've lost our confidence in other humans. What happens? Our problems pile upon them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And above astonishingly difficult to solve, I've just written unmanageability. Simple. Please underline this first sentence. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Now, frothy emotional appeal could be an intervention. Personally, I've never been a victim of that. I've sat in on some of those, but I've never had anyone do it to me. But I've had countless frothy emotional appeals from family members. You know, I can picture my dad's face like it was yesterday, pleading with me, begging with me, with tears in his eyes and his face all red. Please, can't you just stop? Can't you see what you're doing to me, to your brother, to yourself? Can't you stop doing that? That's a killer, man. That's a killer. And it worked for a while. But once the heat went down, I went right back to it, because frothy emotional appeals seldom suffice. Suffice means that we do it all by itself. And we're going to come across a number of these inadequate, insufficient higher powers. There's one of them, a frothy emotional appeal. That's not going to keep us sober long. We're going to get into Bill's story shortly, where he says that fear sobered him up for a bit. Just going to meetings, which is fellowship alone, will sober you up for a bit. But if you're the real alcoholic, you need more than that. You need divine intervention. You need something spiritual in nature. If we're beyond human aid, then meetings alone, which is human aid, is insufficient. And we're going to come across a number of these other things. We're always going to note them as we come across them. These are insufficient, inadequate, higher powers. And here's one, frothy emotional appeals. And actually, here's the other one. We just said that in the previous paragraph, they've lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human. Well, it's human aid, fellowship alone. Okay. Seldom suffices. Please highlight this sentence. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must, that circle must in green. I like to color code the highlightings that we do, because if I'm looking for all of the musts in the book, it's a lot easier to thumb through it and just look for things in green. If I'm looking for all of them, the musts are in green. If I'm looking for all of the prayers and promises, I thumb through the book and I look for the pink highlighter. If I'm looking for the approached references, we do that in blue. And if we're looking for the recovered, we look for the orange highlighter. It's just a way of finding things a lot easier when you go through the book, because if all you're doing is highlighting stuff, how do you know what's a prayer, what's a promise, what's an approach, what's a must, etc. So I know it sounds anal retentive, and it is, but it is helpful. There's some method to my madness. More madness than method, but I'll give you that. Okay, back to the book. The message, and I suggest we highlight this in whatever color, yellow, but let's underline it because it's an important statement. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight, depth and weight, knowledge and experience, knowledge and experience. Doctors may have a lot of knowledge. They don't have the depth and the weight, the experience that we have. I could look and did look tons of doctors in the eyes and say, pal, you don't understand. I don't care how much shit you got up on your wall. You don't understand. How do you explain craving to somebody who's never experienced it? I don't know. I don't think it can be done. But in any case, in order to reach us, the message must have depth and weight. And please highlight the rest of this paragraph. In nearly all cases, and that's not absolute, nearly all cases. So I didn't realize that the microphone was a mile away. I hope you're getting this. In nearly all cases, their ideals must, here we go, must again in green. And an ideal is just a standard goal of perfection. According to 1939 dictionary, I have an ideal is defined as a standard or goal of perfection. So our goals, our ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. And please underline that last phrase, if they are to recreate their lives. And you may want to circle recreate. Recreate is defined as to create anew. It doesn't mean restore one's life, what it was before alcohol or anything like that. We are creating a new entity, a new personality. We are not the same people we were when we started this. That's how we recreate our lives. If any feel as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line. I mentioned last week, and I'll be mentioning it, I guess, several times, that a lot of this part of the book is directed to the medical community. It's not just to alcoholics and families of alcoholics. He's pleading with the medical community to listen, to give what these guys have found an opportunity. Give it a chance, because Lord knows we have failed. Hundreds of years of trying to treat this without any success whatsoever, significant success. These people found it. Please be open-minded. And that's what he's saying here. Let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work. Here's a heavy, and even of their sleeping moments. This guy loved us. We kept him up at night, thinking about how he can help us. You know, the subtitle of the biography of William D. Silkworth is called The Little Doctor Who Loved Drunks. I think that's very appropriate for Dr. Silkworth. He loved us. He risked his career for us so many times. And even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder, and please underline that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. How's that? That not just listen to what they have to say, but we have accepted it and we're encouraging it. We are promoting it in a sense. And please highlight the rest of this paragraph, the next 4 lines. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found, and I'm going to suggest you underline the rest of this paragraph, nothing. You may want to circle nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. That statement is as true today as it was in 1939. 90 years from our creation, the medical community has not found anything that rivals the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So it's a pretty extraordinary statement. Where are we? I don't want to start that next paragraph with 5 minutes left. So I'm going to stop. We'll turn the recording off. And if you got any questions or statements or sharings that you want, we can do that. Let me turn that off.